Hey class, today we're going to talk about the federal bureaucracy. Again, this is a subject that is 2.6 million people big. When we talk about the federal bureaucracy, you're talking about the government. That is part and parcel with the executive branch. Federal bureaucracy is an extension of the president. And before we really dive into start talking about how the federal bureaucracy is put together through agencies and departments and all that kind of thing, we need to define what a bureaucracy is. A bureaucracy is any large complex administration handling everyday operations for an entity. This could be something as complicated as the State Department, which handles all of the foreign policy initiatives of the executive branch, or as prosaic as our school. Our high school is a bureaucracy because it shares these three common features of every bureaucracy. First, it's hierarchical in nature. There is a chain of command. So at the very top in our school district is the Board of Education. The elected Board of Education is 7 members. They select a superintendent who runs the day-to-day operations of this large bureaucracy. The superintendent hires multiple associate superintendents who hire principals for as many buildings as you might have in your district. They in turn employ multiple assistant principals, maybe one in charge of curriculum, another one in charge of discipline, let's say. And then you have department chairs. You have a leader of the social studies department, a leader of the math department, and below them are teachers. And the teachers teach a particular subject, or multiple subjects as the case may be. That's an example of a hierarchical authority. You know who's your boss, and you can take issues to that person above you and above you and above you. So there's a chain of command. You know who your boss is to talk to work out an issue. It also features job specialization. I teach government and also world history. And yet, if you were to put me in a math class, I would be virtually useless because I need to take my shoes off to count past 10. Thus, specialization. I would not be a functional teacher in a science classroom or a math classroom, but I have specialized in social studies. Finally, formalized rules. We have rules and procedures that we are to follow as we do our jobs. The Illinois State Board of Education gives us rules. The administration gives us rules. There are policies that we must follow, just as there are policies that you must follow as a student that you can find in the student handbook. Teachers have lots of rules and procedures that we have to follow as well. Thus, a bureaucracy. Every bureaucracy features those 3 components. Now, the federal bureaucracy is kind of special because it's so big. We've talked about this in class, that there are a lot of federal agencies. Virtually the entirety of the executive branch is part of this federal bureaucracy. Departments are the largest of these agencies. They are so important, they are considered, the heads of these departments, called secretaries in most cases, are considered cabinet level positions. Now, I will post this to our Google Classroom, and you can go and examine, for example, the Justice Department through this hypertext link. But again, I will post this on Google Classroom so you can go to those websites yourself and see an example. Roughly the same, possibly the same size, maybe larger, are agencies or administrations. These are major units of the federal government. They're large agencies handling some component, major component of the federal bureaucracy, the federal government's efforts. So, for example, NASA, the National Aeronautic and Space Administration, it doesn't rise to the level of cabinet position, but it's an important administration in its own right. There's about 150 of these. Social Security Administration. Next are commissions. Commissions are independent regulatory agencies. Independent in that the president, no president can appoint more than, let's say, half or 2/3 of their membership. So no one president can completely dominate a commission. The Federal Elections Commission, the Federal Communications Commission. They're beyond the control of the president, and they also have a lot of authority. They have legislative powers in the fact that they have rulemaking powers. They also hold hearings, just as we've talked about in the past, how the FCC has the power to fine people for fine companies that violate their rules. And they also have executive powers, okay? So they oversee some important area of regulation. The Securities and Exchange Commission, for example, regulates the traders and the Merck Exchange, the stock exchange, that kind of thing. Finally, federal corporations or authorities look like businesses, but they're funded through the government. So the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Guarantee, or the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the Post Office, U.S. Postal Service, Amtrak. They look like businesses. They bring in money, but they are either subsidized or serve an important constitutional function like the Postal Service. Those are your four general elements of the federal bureaucracy. Now, there are some special elements. The executive office of the president is located in the White House. Its component, and they are the closest advisors to the president. It is made up of the office of the White House, which includes the staff of the building itself, the National Security Council, the advisors to the president on matters of national security, obviously, the Office of Management and Budget, which again advises the president on constructing a budget for submission to the Congress each year. The Council of Economic Advisors, which is the component of the executive office of the president, which advises the president on economic matters. These are staff agencies. They exist to support the president in exercising his or her executive functions. Okay, they give advice to the president. And again, staff agencies make up the EOP, make up the executive office of the president. Again, I encourage you, check out on the Google Classroom these components so that you can check out these hypertext links. They are pretty interesting in their own right. Now, the president's cabinet are his or her chief advisors. They're an informal advisory board that comes together, to serve the president's needs, whatever those might be, in terms of policy advice. Generally, presidents meet at least once a week, maybe more often, and get briefed on what's going on in these major components of their of the national life. So the State Department, Secretary of the State Department, the Attorney General, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of the Interior, Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary of Education. All of these different secretaries meet to advise the president on a regular basis, and they are, in their own right, important, powerful leaders of these major departments with tens of thousands of people working for them. And again, they are the heads of these major departments. There are 15 executive departments led by a secretary or attorney general. And again, each, as I said before, each has this broad field of activity. The employees are not political appointees. The only political appointees in all of these agencies and departments and all that are the head of it, whether it's a secretary or administrator or whatever, generally the second, third in command. The attorneys, political advisors, those types are political appointments, and the president appoints those people with Senate advice and consent. Otherwise, the people working for these agencies are civil servants. Okay, they are not political appointees. They are lifers. They're lifetime bureaucrats working in these agencies. They might have worked there 10, 20, 30 or more years, independent of who's in charge, Democrat or Republican. Now, of course, they all have their personal viewpoints, but by and large, they are doing their job, whether it's a Democrat or Republican president. Now, departments are referred to as line agencies. Okay, they perform tasks for which they were created. They don't give advice to the president. The department chair or the department head might, but they perform in line with their duties. They meet with people, individuals, help out people, normal citizens, and also then do their function as to whatever they were set up to do. Now, agencies and administrations are outside of a department. Well, why have them? Why don't we just roll all these departments and agencies like NASA into these large departments? Well, because what should NASA be a part of? The Defense Department? Do you really want NASA being militarized, for example? Basically, they fill the cracks between these large departments, okay? They fill in gaps between them. The Office of Personnel Management, OPM, basically is like a human resources department, hiring and firing department for the entire government, and a warehouse for all of the records that are required to run such a large bureaucracy. And as the government's gotten bigger, as it's expanded, more and more agencies have been created to implement the policy of the presidents as the government has expanded, like we talked about in class. There are three main groups of agencies, as I discussed earlier: the independent executive agencies, NASA, GSA, the independent regulatory agencies. These are, again, these regulatory commissions. Finally, government corporations, again, your FDIC, your United States Postal Service, etc. Now, a word about the people that work for the federal government. The civil service is made up of the civilian employees of the federal government. 2.8 million, give or take. There are over 300,000 federal employees living in Washington, D.C. area alone. Now, some of them are appointees, but the civil servants are those bureaucrats whose jobs do not depend upon their political ideology. Right? And this started back in 1883. The Pendleton Act basically established the modern civil service. Prior to the 1883, you might remember the phrase from U.S. history class last year, the spoils system. Basically, the expression was, he who wins gets the spoils of putting their own people, their favorites, into positions of government. Patronage is a similar idea. This is where, hey, you help me get elected, I'm going to reward you with a job, or your brother with a job, or your sister with a job. That all changed started to change with this Pendleton Act. Now merit, your ability, not your connections, who you knew, determine whether or not you got a job. Now it's what you knew and whether you were effective at your job got you a job. And that's been the case ever since. Okay, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening.